They took my parking spot, and for a long time, I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. Then one day I realized something that changed everything. What they thought was convenience, I could turn into leverage, and that's when this stopped being about parking. I'd been living in the same building for almost 6 years, nothing fancy, just one of those mid-80s concrete apartment complexes that tried to look modern once and then gave up halfway through the 2000s. The kind of place where the paint fades unevenly, the elevator hums like it's tired of life, and everybody kind of knows each other without really knowing each other. My unit was on the 3rd floor, 3B, small but comfortable, and more importantly, it came with something that mattered way more than square footage in that neighborhood: a guaranteed parking spot. Spot 214. Underground garage, assigned parking, clearly marked, my number stenciled in white that had chipped just enough over the years to feel authentic. It was written in my lease, printed clean, no ambiguity, no fine print tricks. That spot was mine, and in a city where street parking after 7 p.m. felt like winning the lottery, that wasn't a small thing. It was peace of mind. And for 6 years, it stayed that way. Every day, same routine. Pull in, slight turn left, 2nd row, 3rd spot from the pillar. 214, I could park there half asleep. It became muscle memory, like brushing your teeth or locking your door. It was one of those small, boring certainties in life you don't even realize you depend on until it's gone. Monday morning, around 7:40, I remember because I was already running late, coffee in one hand, keys in the other. I hit the garage like I always did, and there it was. A black Range Rover. Not just parked there, settled there. Centered perfectly between the lines like it had always belonged. Clean enough to reflect the fluorescent lights overhead, custom plates, tinted windows. The kind of car that doesn't ask for permission, it assumes it has it. I slowed down without realizing it, like my brain needed a second to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. I even checked the number painted on the concrete, like maybe I'd somehow taken a wrong turn after 6 years of the exact same route. My spot. Occupied. I sat there for a few seconds longer than I should have, engine running, just staring at it. Not angry yet, just confused, like maybe this was temporary, maybe someone made a mistake, maybe they'd be gone by the time I got back. I circled the garage once, then twice, then a third time, slower, scanning corners like a spot might magically appear if I looked hard enough. Nothing. Every space was taken, guest spots full, even the awkward ones near the trash room that nobody wanted gone. I ended up parking 3 blocks away on the street, squeezing into a tight gap between a pickup and a fire hydrant that was just far enough to be legal, grabbed my bag, and walked back with that slow-building irritation creeping in, the kind that doesn't explode, it simmers. When I got back to the garage, I stood there for a second, looking at the Range Rover again, and decided to be reasonable. People make mistakes, right? I pulled a receipt from my wallet, flipped it over, and wrote, "Hey, this is an assigned spot for Unit 3B. Could you please use guest parking? Appreciate it." Kept it simple. Polite. No attitude. Slid it under the wiper blade and went upstairs. I expected that to be the end of it. It wasn't. Next morning, same time, same routine, and the Range Rover was still there. The note? Gone. That's when confusion turned into something else. I stood there longer this time, arms crossed, just staring at the windshield like maybe the car would explain itself if I waited long enough. It didn't. So I went to the leasing office. Now, the property manager, her name was Denise, had this way of talking where everything sounded like it had already been decided before you even opened your mouth. Polite smile, steady tone, but you could feel the walls going up before the conversation even started. I told her what happened, kept it calm, explained the situation, even mentioned the note. She nodded, clicked around on her computer, pulled up my lease, and for a second, I thought, okay, this is easy. She's going to confirm it and fix it. Then she paused, just slightly, and that was enough for me to know something was off. She said, "That space is currently assigned to the penthouse unit." I blinked. No, it's assigned to me. It's literally in my lease. She turned the screen a little, scrolling, then leaned back like she was explaining something obvious to a child. The penthouse tenant has priority parking. They're paying for 2 premium spaces. I felt that shift in my chest, that quiet tightening when you realize logic isn't going to win this conversation. "I've been parking there for 6 years," I said. "Every single day. It's in my contract." She gave me that same smile, thinner now. Then there was likely a clerical error when your lease was drafted. A clerical error. 6 years long. I actually laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous it didn't feel real. So your mistake just becomes my problem? She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she said, we can reassign you to a different space. I don't want a different space, I said, a little sharper this time. I want my space. She tapped her pen once against the desk, like she was already done with the conversation. I'll look into it. And if you've ever heard that sentence from someone in management, you know what it really means. Nothing's going to happen. I walked out of that office already knowing the Range Rover wasn't going anywhere. And it didn't. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Every morning, same car, same spot, like I'd imagined ever owning it in the first place. I kept parking on the street. And that's when the real costs started showing up. 2 parking tickets in 1 week because I misread a street cleaning sign after a long day. Then one night, sometime between midnight and sunrise, someone sideswiped my car and didn't bother leaving a note. Just a long scrape down the side like a signature from a stranger who didn't care. I remember standing there in the morning, running my hand over the damage, feeling that mix of anger and helplessness that hits when you know exactly why something happened, but there's no one you can actually hold accountable. And the worst part? My spot was still sitting there. Perfect. Protected. Empty. Except it wasn't mine anymore. I went back to Denise. This time, I didn't bother being polite. You said you'd look into it. She didn't even pretend to remember the conversation. Just pulled up my file again. Same routine, same calm tone. We've assigned you a guest space at the far end of the garage. I already knew which one she meant. Narrow, dim lighting. Half the ceiling pipes hanging low enough to make you duck if you weren't paying attention, and a good 2-minute walk from the elevator. That's the best we can do, she added. I leaned on the counter, looked her straight in the eye, and asked, who's the penthouse tenant? That was the first time she hesitated. I can't disclose that information. Of course she couldn't. But I didn't need her to. Because at that point, this had already stopped being about a parking spot and started becoming something else entirely. I didn't get the name from Denise, but buildings like that don't really keep secrets. They just slow them down a little. You spend enough time around mailboxes, elevators, overheard conversations in the hallway. Things start to connect. A last name here, a delivery label there, a concierge slipping up in small talk without realizing it matters. That's how I got it. Evan Hallbrook. Penthouse unit. And once I had the name, the rest came easy. A quick search told me exactly who I was dealing with. Luxury auto dealerships. 3 locations across the metro area. All high-end imports. The kind of places with glass walls and espresso machines where nobody asks about price unless they already know they can afford it. His face showed up in a couple of local business articles too, smiling, confident, the type of guy who talked about expanding market share and customer experience like he'd never been told no in his life. And honestly, that part tracked. Because someone like that doesn't accidentally take someone else's parking spot and ignore it for months. That's a decision. That's a mindset. At first, I thought about handling it the obvious way, the emotional way. You know, the petty stuff people fantasize about when they feel cornered. A key dragged just a little too hard across black paint. A tire mysteriously losing air overnight. Maybe a complaint filed every single day until someone got tired enough to do something about it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. None of that would actually solve anything. It might feel good for about 10 seconds, sure, but I'd still be parking 3 blocks away. I'd still be dealing with tickets, damage, inconvenience. And guys like Evan, they don't feel those kinds of hits the same way. You scratch his car, he replaces the panel. You cost him time, he throws money at it until it goes away. That kind of revenge only works on people who have something to lose in the same way you do. So I let that idea go. And instead, I started asking a different question. Not how do I get back at him, but what does he actually care about? That's when things shifted. Because when you stop reacting and start thinking, you notice details you would have missed before. Like the building itself. It was old, like I said. Built sometime in the mid-80s, back when zoning rules were a little looser, and things got added over time without always being fully integrated into the original structure. The underground garage wasn't part of the initial build. It had been added later, during a renovation phase when the property was partially converted into individually owned units before going back to rentals again. And that kind of history leaves footprints. Messy paperwork. Split ownership. Technicalities. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, but I had a feeling there was something buried in there. So one afternoon, instead of going home after work, I drove down to the county records office. Not because I'm the type of person who enjoys digging through public documents, but because at that point, I was tired of feeling stuck. And if there was even a small chance the answer was on paper somewhere, I was going to find it. It took hours. Old property maps, scanned documents, transaction logs that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. I went through all of it. At first, nothing made sense. Just numbers, parcel IDs, legal descriptions that might as well have been written in another language. But then, something clicked. The parking spaces. They weren't all part of the main property. Some of them, only a handful, had been carved out and sold separately decades ago during that partial condo conversion. Individually deeded. Owned by private entities, not the building. Which meant they weren't controlled by management. They were leased. I felt that little spark right then, the one you get when a puzzle piece finally fits. So I kept digging, cross-referencing parcel numbers, tracing ownership records, following the chain from one name to another, until eventually I landed on it. Spot 214. My spot. It wasn't owned by the building. It belonged to an LLC. A small one, not some big corporate entity, just a name that hadn't changed in years, tied to an address in another state. I sat back in that uncomfortable plastic chair, staring at the screen, letting it sink in. All this time, Denise had been acting like the building had the authority to reassign that space. But they didn't. They were leasing it from someone else. Which meant, technically, they couldn't just give it away. And suddenly, this wasn't a dead end anymore. It was an opening. Now I just needed to find the person behind that LLC. That part took a little more work, but not as much as you'd think. Business registrations, mailing addresses, a couple of outdated filings that still listed a managing member. Name was Walter Green, late 70s, retired, living in Arizona. And based on what I could find, he probably hadn't thought about that parking space in years. I called the number listed on one of the records, not expecting much. It rang longer than I thought it would. Then a voice picked up, older, a little cautious. Hello. Hi. Is this Walter Green? Who's asking? I introduced myself, kept it simple, explained that I was calling about a parking space he owned tied to a building back in my city. There was a pause on the line, then a soft chuckle. I own parking spaces. That told me everything I needed to know. He barely remembered. I explained the situation, filled in the gaps, told him about the building leasing it, about how it had been reassigned without my consent. Not in a complaining way, just laying out the facts. He listened, didn't interrupt. And when I finished, he said, So what are you asking? I took a breath. Would you be willing to sell it? Another pause. Longer this time. Then he said something that honestly surprised me. Sure. Just like that. No negotiation yet. No hesitation. Just sure. We talked numbers for a bit after that. I didn't lowball him. I knew what it was worth to me at that point, not just financially, but strategically. We settled on $18,000. It wasn't pocket change for me. Not even close. I had to take out a personal loan to make it happen. Signed paperwork I'd never imagined signing for something as simple as a parking spot, but I wasn't thinking about it like that anymore. Because it wasn't just a spot. It was control. A week later, the paperwork cleared. Deed transferred. Spot 214. Legally, was mine. Not through a lease. Not through a building agreement. Mine. And for the first time in months. I smiled when I pulled into that garage. The Range Rover was still there. Same position. Same confidence. Like nothing had changed. I parked in the guest area that night on purpose. Walked past it slowly. Looked at it for a second, and then went upstairs. Because I wasn't in a rush anymore. The next move? That needed to be done right. I found Evan's dealership number online the next morning. Called mid-afternoon. A receptionist picked up, polished voice, the kind trained to sound warm but efficient. Thank you for calling Hallbrook Imports. How can I direct your call? Yeah, I'm looking for Evan Hallbrook. May I ask what this is regarding? I paused just long enough. It's about something he's currently using that doesn't belong to him. That got me through. A few clicks, a brief hold. Then another voice came on. Confident. Slight edge to it. This is Evan. Hey, Evan. My name's Daniel. I live in your building. Silence for a beat. Then, okay. I'm calling about parking spot 214. Another pause. Then a short laugh. Is this about that note from a while back? Look, man, you should have talked to management. That space is assigned to me. I leaned back in my chair, calm. Yeah, that's what they told you. And that's what it is, he said, tone tightening just slightly. So I'm not sure what you want here. I let a second pass. Then I said, I want you to move your car. That was it. No build-up. No explanation. Just that. He laughed again, louder this time. Yeah, that's not happening. Okay, I said. Then I'll just email you something. Email me what? You'll see. I hung up before he could respond. Pulled up the scanned copy of the deed and sent it. Subject line simple. Parking space 214, proof of ownership. I didn't expect an immediate reply, but I didn't have to wait long. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Same number, different tone. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before I picked up. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, just I wanted that shift to sit with him for a second, that moment where confidence turns into uncertainty and uncertainty starts asking questions it didn't have to ask before. I answered calm, same tone as before. Hey. There was no laugh this time, no edge, just a measured pause and then, Daniel, I got your email. You could hear it, the recalibration, like he was flipping through a new version of reality in his head, trying to figure out where the leverage went. Yeah, I said, figured you would. Another pause, shorter now, more controlled. So, you're saying you own that space? I'm not saying it, I replied. I'm showing it. It's recorded, it's filed, it's mine. He exhaled through his nose, thinking. Okay, he said finally, tone smoothing out, business mode kicking in. Then let's just handle this the easy way. I'll buy it from you. 20,000. I almost smiled at that, not because of the number, but because of how predictable it was. To him, this was still just a transaction, just a small inconvenience that could be solved by throwing a slightly bigger number at it. No, I said, simple, no hesitation. Silence again, then, all right, 25. No, a beat. 30. Still no. That's when a little frustration slipped through, just enough to crack the surface. What do you want then? He asked, sharper now. And that was the moment I'd been building toward, the one where I could have cashed out, walked away, made a quick profit, and ended the whole thing right there. But that wasn't the point anymore. I'm not selling it, I said. Then why'd you buy it? He shot back. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window like I was watching the scene play out from above. You'll see. And I hung up. Now here's the thing. I didn't rush the next step. I let a few days pass, went about my routine, kept parking in the guest spot like nothing had changed, even though everything had. Because the move I was about to make, it needed timing, and it needed the right person. See, when I looked into Evan's business, I didn't just stop at him. I looked at the whole landscape, competitors, market overlap, who was taking shots at his share of the pie. And one name kept coming up. Victor Reyes. Ran a competing dealership across town, not as polished, not as flashy, but aggressive, the kind of guy who built his business by going directly after people like Evan. His ads were louder, his pricing more flexible, his branding bold enough to get under your skin if you were in the same space. And more importantly, he loved visibility. So I reached out. Didn't go through a receptionist this time. I sent a direct email, laid it out clean, no fluff. Told him I owned a premium parking spot in the same residential building where his biggest competitor lived, told him exactly which spot, exactly where it was positioned, right near the elevator, high-foot traffic, impossible to miss. Then I added one line that I knew would hook him. If you parked one of your branded cars there every day, people would notice. He replied faster than I expected. Call me. We talked that evening. Victor didn't waste time with small talk. You serious about this? He asked. Completely. And it's legal? Completely. He laughed once, low, impressed. That's creative. We discussed terms. I didn't pitch it like a favor. I pitched it like what it was, an opportunity. Daily exposure inside the home base of his competitor, a constant, silent reminder sitting right in his line of sight every time he came and went. We settled on $800 a month. 3-year lease. He didn't even try to negotiate that hard, because he understood the value immediately. A week later, it started. First morning, I made sure I was there early. Not because I needed to be, but because I wanted to see it happen. The garage was quiet, that usual low hum of fluorescent lights, distant echo of footsteps, and then I heard it. Engine first, then the slow roll of tires against concrete. A bright red Porsche pulled in, clean, sharp, impossible to ignore, and along both sides, wrapped in bold lettering, was Victor's dealership logo. No subtlety, no restraint. It turned clean into spot 214, centered perfectly, like it had every right in the world to be there. And just like that, the space was occupied again. But this time, on my terms. I leaned against one of the pillars for a second, just watching it sit there, that quiet satisfaction settling in, not loud, not explosive, just steady. Controlled. It didn't take long for the reaction. 2 days later, my phone rang. Same number. I answered. "You've got some nerve," Evan said. No greeting this time, just straight into it. I could hear the anger now, not explosive, but tight, contained, like he was trying to keep control of it. "Do I?" I replied. "You think this is funny?" he asked. I glanced at the Porsche through the garage camera feed I had access to now. "I think it's effective. That car doesn't belong there." "Actually," I said, "it does. I leased the space." He let out a short, disbelieving breath. To him, yeah. A longer silence this time, and I could picture it, him standing there, maybe in that garage, looking at that car, seeing that logo every single time he walked past. "I'll have it towed," he said finally. "You can try," I replied. "Tow company's going to call me first." "This isn't over," he added, quieter now. "No," I said, "it's not." And it wasn't. He tried. Twice, actually. Both times, the tow company did exactly what they're supposed to do. They checked ownership. Called me. "Is this vehicle authorized to be in spot 214? "Yes," I said both times. "Fully authorized." And that was the end of that. HOA got involved briefly, or tried to. But once the paperwork surfaced, once it was clear the space was privately owned and properly leased, their hands were tied. "It's a civil matter," they said. Translation, "Not our problem." Then the offers started coming in again. 40,000. Then 50. Each one a little more urgent than the last, a little less confident. I turned them all down. Because by then, it wasn't about the money. It was about the shift. The fact that every day, without fail, that bright red Porsche sat there like a billboard he couldn't take down. And me? I was making $800 a month off a space I used to fight just to park in. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because depending on who you ask, I'm either the guy who stood up for himself in a smart, legal way, or I'm the guy who took it too far, who turned something small into something personal. I've had neighbors come up to me, quietly, in the elevator, saying things like, "Honestly, he had it coming," and others who just shake their head, like I crossed some invisible line you're not supposed to cross, even if you're right. And I get it. I do. Because there's a version of this story where I just take the reassigned spot, move on, avoid the conflict, save myself the loan, the time, the effort. Life would have been simpler. But it also would have meant accepting that if someone with enough money or influence decides to take something from you, you're just supposed to adjust. And that part didn't sit right with me. So yeah, I made a different choice. And it worked. But here's the question I keep coming back to, and I'm curious what you think. At what point does standing your ground turn into something else? When does getting even cross into going too far? Because if the roles were reversed, if someone did this to you, would you have stopped at getting your spot back? Or would you have done exactly what I did and made sure they never forgot it? Let me know in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you like stories like this, the ones that sit right on that line between justice and revenge, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. There's more.